This is Russ Dennis with the Nonprofit Chat Nonprofit Exchange for Tuesday, May 2nd. We have Thomas Moviel, CEO of 50 USA Markets, headquartered in Orlando, Florida. How's the weather down there, Thomas?
We actually are finally getting some rain today, thanks. We've been in a drought for probably the past month, which is very unlike Florida. So it's for once we're happy to see some rain.
Drought is a way that some nonprofits have actually described their funding, and a big piece of that revolves around the fact that people don't know that they're there or what it is that they're trying to do. And so when we talk about marketing in the business sense, a lot of people cringe, but really communicating what you're doing is pretty important. So I know that you do a lot with all sorts of market research and helping people position themselves. Why would it be important for a nonprofit or people who are thinking about starting a nonprofit to do market research?
To know if there's a real need out there for their nonprofit and their services and obviously their mission. There are, I don't know how many tens of thousands of nonprofits out there already. I think a lot of times that people have a good idea, they see a need, and they say this would be a great idea for a nonprofit, but there may be already nonprofits out there doing that. Maybe they're not targeting your community or your school system or whatever it may be that you're really focusing on. And then there's always going to be, so there might be that nonprofit out there doing very similar work to what you want to do. They're already getting funding from somewhere, and as all nonprofits know, funding is just, it's a scarce resource. So I think when you are going to get up and get a nonprofit going, they're going to, as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun, but at the same time, there are new ways of doing things. New strategies. But I think it's important to do your market research because you want to know, is funding even viable? And because if there are dozens of nonprofits out there that you'd never heard of, or one huge mammoth of a nonprofit that has the monopoly on that entire area, maybe your chances of getting funding are going to be very slim. But maybe instead your opportunity is going and, I don't know how often they do this, but like working as like a subcontractor for them, or starting, talking to them directly about partnering and, where are areas that they're focusing on and not focusing on. So market research is not just secondary research of like pulling the data. So there's going to be a fair amount of data out there, but also doing the primary research and not just on the internet, but picking up the phone and making lots of calls. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I could probably talk for days about it, but that I guess is a start.
Well, there are lots of reasons to do that. So when you went out to come up with your concept for 50 USA Markets, when you were putting your business together, you did a lot of research. And so talk about what that looked like and how your background played into that, a little bit about how you built your team to fill in some of those areas that you needed a little extra support in and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I hate to disappoint, but I kind of work just kind of, and my business kind of started overnight, and work just kind of fell into my lap. But getting started. But once I got started, because I work for I work for more and more domestic companies and organizations nowadays that but I focus solely on the U.S. But I started off working for foreign companies that were looking to enter the U.S. market, wanted to know all the ins and outs. I have a strong international background that goes back to working in international development and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Carpathian Mountains for a couple of years doing economic development work. So very grassroots stuff and working with a lot of nonprofits over there and local city councils and churches and city hall. But basically, once I started getting going, I knew I needed to expand my business, and I was working for one trade office. Basically, how I started getting going was finding out there's tons of lists out there and tons of information. So I just started finding, well, who are the other trade offices? How do they operate? I started like talking to more diplomats and people that I know that are working in the international field, and began finding out, well, I realized that a lot of big countries that are big into trade, say like France or the UK, they have, huge departments with people doing what I do. But it's a lot of the smaller companies that, like for example, Latvia. I've been talking with Latvia lately, and they had a trade office until 2008, and then they closed it down. And then so their company said no representation here in the U.S. So for me, it was just talking to my friends and asking, and I got an in with one of my Latvian friends from grad school who had contacts in the government. And then because I live in Orlando, I started tapping into, there's not a huge international community here, but I started looking at what's going on in Miami. So it's just thinking logically, well, where does trade happen? Well, a lot of trade happens in Miami. So I started looking at, well, what trade offices are located in Miami? And then I started looking at the websites, finding out who runs it. And then literally, well, sending out a lot of just emails and then follow-ups and picking up the phone and cold calling and sharing with them, this is what I do. This is how I can help you. Do you guys have any, what are your current needs? What are some of, what are your biggest challenges? Do you, and let's set up a time to talk, and then talking more and more and more, and then going through some of the vetting process to become a vendor for them. So that's a big way that I've done things, and just word of mouth. And I don't use a lot of social media. I know for a lot of people it's the big thing. For me, I just maybe I'm a little more old school, and I just find who these people are, and I pick up the phone when I call, I send emails. So and that's how I like to do things.
All right. Yeah, I've got a little bit of an economic development background with working with a tribal nation myself, and economic development is pretty broad. So it's about lifting all boats up, and you stepped in and felt the need that was there, and that's really critical. So I know that that's proven to be lucrative. There's always so much international trade, but you turn your attention to domestic markets, and it's really uplifting to me to know that you're focused on being at home and working and doing work that helps support nonprofits to educate them a little bit on some of the things that they need to do to become a little bit more marketable. So if you were talking to someone at a new nonprofit or a social entrepreneur that was thinking about starting a social enterprise, as far as finding out what he needs to know, what are some of the first steps that you give him or her to take in order to find out if their idea is viable?
Yeah. Well, I think a few things that I would do is obviously start with a very basic research on nonprofits. It's going to depend on what your focus is. Are you national or are you local? Well, if you're only local, then just focus on your local market. Find out what other nonprofits are out there. I used to live in Colorado, and there's a lot of nonprofits. And there was it's called like Colorado Nonprofit Association.org. And they just had lists of all the nonprofits and what they do. And so you can usually find a local resource, or you can start with, if you can't find anything, if you're in a remote area, maybe calling your local city hall or city councilman and finding out. Their offices a lot of times can be hopefully very helpful, and can let you know what kind of nonprofits and needs are out there. And definitely, another way is, especially if you're going to go more regional or national, there are there's a trade association for everything. So I know that I could find within a couple minutes some databases with that are big proponents, and their job is propagating whatever maybe the general nonprofit industry, and doing lobbying on the state level or national level, and they're going to have databases and resources, and then find out who else is doing that out there. And so maybe and then so you can find out who else is doing something similar to what you're doing. Or you might find that they're doing it the very same thing, or it may seem that they're doing the same thing, but then research their website and reach out to them and talk to them. Hopefully they're not very controlling and competitive, and are willing to share what they do, because maybe you're going to find that what they do is very helpful, but it still doesn't fulfill a certain other needs that you see. And another thing that I would do is really talking to people again in the industry, find out what the trends are, and find out. And one of the ways you can find out what the trends are is finding out who is funding the nonprofits, who's funding the nonprofits that are similar to you, the startups. And what types of projects and nonprofits are they funding? Because you might have something great for capacity building, right? You want to do capacity building for businesses or whatever it may be, but that's not what's being funded right now. So you might need to then find, well, all right, if very little or no funding is out there for capacity building in my idea, maybe what are other nonprofits that have that kind of interest that I could latch onto, maybe do some volunteer work, learn the industry more, or maybe what you'll see is how you can take your vision and adapt it, and because maybe there's funding going out for, I don't know, female or teenage empowerment, something along those lines. And I don't know how you can combine those two, but doing research on another topic that really interests you, or where things are being funded, you might begin to see that your initial vision is not exactly what it's going to be, and you might have to modify it a bit to where you can do some capacity building, but it's an area that's getting funded and might increase your chances of getting funded. Does that make sense?
That does. A lot of people have important, as you said, to kind of look in there. I'm in Colorado, so
okay.
I'm a member of the Colorado Nonprofit Association, and and they are members of the National Council of Nonprofits, and that's where you can sort of plug in and fan out in all of these other places. But I'm a firm believer in what you were talking about as far as finding other people who are doing the same thing. A big piece of market research is what's called the competitive analysis, and competition. Unfortunately, it can be a barrier to collaboration. So, in looking at that landscape, more than half the charities that are started fail. So, why is understanding the competition important? And what are some of the things you look for as far as somebody that might be a potential collaborator, as it were?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing I look in for, in someone that might be a potential collaborator, is someone who actually genuinely expresses interest in collaborating, or just throwing it out there like, hey, do you see any collaborative opportunities or anything you guys need help with? If you were in my position, what would you recommend I do? And don't rely just on necessarily one person's advice. Sometimes one person's advice can be golden, or it can be just rubbish. So, and very, very biased. And they might have their own agenda as to for why they tell you what they do. But getting on why to research competitors is saving time, effort, and money. Because if you have, you feel you have a great idea and you pay, you spend all this time getting your 501c3 up and running, you're talking to your friends, you're trying to build a board, and then you find out you can't get any funding, or, you don't have time to write the grants, you don't know how to write the grants, or you can't hire someone to write the grants for you. I mean, this is, it goes a lot into strategic planning, of course, but, you need to know, again, who else is out there and where they're getting their funding from. And if you think that there's room for you in your nonprofit in that segment, getting to know your competitors is very much a what it is that you find that they do well and what they don't do well. And maybe you can see what they don't do well or just don't do at all, that's your in. And again, I mean, you can start with a mission, but that doesn't mean you have to, and it may be a little bit different than what you originally wanted to do, but that doesn't mean you have to stick with that forever. It's just an in. I think many times people are too rigid, and it's not just a nonprofit. This is in business. Like, it has to be this way. Like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, things can look, the universe a lot of times will tell you things can look, will point you in the direction that things might be better off, look different than your initial vision. And again, maybe, you start off wanting to work with young girls, but funding is for young boys or whatever. So, or preteens or something like that. And you get going, and then you can, over time, you get to learn the business, you get a good reputation, you learn who your funders are, and then you can start to find other ways to get into that area that maybe you're most passionate about. And so getting back to the competition too is what is their operating efficiency? Maybe, because you see that there's quite a few nonprofits out there that the money that is donated to them is not used very efficiently. And that's something that when I'm making a charitable donation, I don't care if it's $10. I want to know how much of my dollar am I donating is actually going to good use, and maybe 95% of it is going to good use, but what are the results, right? So are people getting what they're supposed to be getting in the community, or whatever the mission of your nonprofit is? So, and that's where, when you can learn about it through talking to people, going to meetings, working, doing research, getting reviews, and finding out your competitors can be a big part of when you're writing your grants, and saying, like, our operating efficiency is going to be, because we have such low overhead, and this is how we can do things for, much less than other nonprofits are doing in this, again, this segment, or we feel that we've done research and this area's been neglected, or there's only one or two nonprofits, but it's still a very underserved population that we can go ahead and do this. So that's all that a lot of what goes into analyzing your competitors. And your job of analyzing your competitors is not to put them down, but just to learn who they are and what are their pros and cons. And that, again, can only help you with positioning yourself, and which is greatly going to increase the chances of your nonprofit being successful, which a lot of that being successful is getting the funding.
Yeah, you talk a little bit too about really just getting that analysis, understanding the market, and essentially what you're talking about, and we've said it before, is that a nonprofit has a look and feel of a business. You're operating an organization that's there to deliver value. And so there's those business principles. So, I don't think people are worried about how much you spend, as long as it's being spent in the way that's delivering impact that has been promised, delivering value. And so I think that you have different people that define that value differently. Yeah. It's going to be different for individual donors versus private foundations that might make a grant, versus a government entity that might make a grant, or any other number of people that you interact with. So, how many nonprofits, when you're sitting down talking with them about this research and the different audiences that are out there that interface with that nonprofit, how do you sort of walk them through that and have that conversation around value and understanding all of the different people that they come in contact with.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, have they, I mean, obviously it kind of depends on the flow of the conversation, but really getting into what makes you unique, or your idea unique in your nonprofit, and talking to them like who else out there is doing that, or have you done research on our people, our funds, these large grant funding agencies, are they funding these types of projects? Have you talked to them? Maybe picked up the phone and called and say, hey, do you guys, what is some of the trends? I mean, why not call the fund people, and then one of the managers and talk to them about the trends? Because a lot of times they know, because a lot of times they make the decisions on this is what the trend's going to be, this is what we feel the needs are. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I think also, getting down into funding is just the getting up and going. Like, if you have a full-time job, do you have the time? If you don't have the time, how are you going to make the time, and how are you, and that might be hiring a team. That might be, spending every weekend for your next year or two, working real hard to get it up and running. And I've been part of the grassroots nonprofits that I got involved with before. It was a 501c3, and became a board member and was on their finance committee. So I got to see a lot of the tough dealings that it went through. But so I think it just comes back again to what makes you, what separates you from the pack. Who out there, how do you know that there's going to be funding for you? When you talk about impact, that's great, but what does impact mean, right? So when I say you, I'm speaking very generically. That, I mean, why do people care about what you do? You might think that they need it, but do they think that they need it? And is there a real clamoring in your community for this type of, for your type of services? Because that can be a big telltale sign if this is something to pursue, or do we pursue a different path, or do we just shut it down altogether? So I think that people are, I think one of the danger points is getting so excited about your idea that seems amazing to you, and it's not to knock it, but you got to really run it through the mill and let people get feedback from people in the industry, and again through your secondary research too, to find out, is your great idea, is the world ready for it? And so there's just take your time, do your due diligence, don't rush things. You can file 501c3 any day of the year, but because I think too often people get too far down the road, and before they find out that it's not sustainable, even if your community needs it, it's just not sustainable for one reason or another. So, and there's no guarantees with doing competitive analysis or market research. I can't guarantee any successes for anyone that I work with, but you can help to increase your odds and your chances. And again, it's all about, I'm a big proponent of being efficient. So what is the most efficient way to build it and to be successful and not waste our time and money?
Yeah, that's sage advice, and it's really thorough. But in looking at that, as we're talking about that, what are some of the most common mistakes you see people make in their analysis? I think that when you pointed out that they get excited about an idea, ooh, I can run off and do this, and everybody needs it. A lot of times they just run with it without analysis. But some people do. They stop and they do some research and run off and get stuck. What are some of the most common oversights and errors that you see them make in the process?
Not researching their competition enough. I mean, really got to know them. and don't be afraid to talk on them or talk to them with integrity, to maybe spy on them, go to one of their events or something like that, or one of their fundraisers, and find out what they're doing, how they do things, because you can learn a ton. And I think, again, I mean, just maybe people only doing secondary research or only doing primary research. I talked to a friend and they said they don't know anyone else that does this. So I think it's a good idea. Or people in my community are really saying that they want it, so it's got to be needed. Well, I mean, if you don't know that you have any competitors out there, or you don't really know what they're up to next, they might be, targeting that need and you have no idea, or nobody may be targeting it because the funding just isn't there, unless you have deep pockets yourself, or have great relations with people with deep pockets. Then that should be a concern of yours. Or again, like only looking at, if you're in a segment with a lot of different players, only researching the, two or three, competitors, 2 or 3 other nonprofits or businesses, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of other players in there too. And so, I mean, if there's 100 different nonprofits, I don't think you necessarily need to, spend days researching, on each one. But you better pick some of the main front runners, and probably more than 2, and find out what they're doing. And I build spreadsheets for my clients, and I said, I'm very big on, like, here's your organization, here's what their main location is. Do they have other locations? Who runs it? Who's on their board of advisors? What are the pros and cons? What are people saying? What are the different programs that they offer? What's their funding? Where are they getting their funding from? So that's something that people can be doing for themselves, as well as taking that time and again, and kind of building that database. And because you're going to learn, learning what their what a competitor's offerings are is one good way of, like, learning what their pros and cons are to it, besides talking to people too. So anyway, I think that answers your question.
Yes. I think also that a lot of people are probably afraid of data, and before it was hard to know where to look, and now there seems to be data everywhere. Some of it free, some of it requires an investment, and so how do you work with someone when they're very much intimidated by the data or afraid of the data? How do you sort of walk them through that? Because if they got enough fear, they won't even bother to do it.
Yeah, data can be very intimidating. I've even gotten intimidated by data before, but you got to persist, and I think one of the biggest ways that I work with the data is being able to explain it in layman's terms. Understanding just what does it mean? Because sometimes data doesn't mean a whole lot. And I'm actually, people kind of think, because I do a lot of market research, that I'm a marketing guy. I'm actually not. I'm an economist by trade. So, and so it makes it a little bit different of what I do, and a little, different perspective and ways that I approach things. But there's, we have a saying in economics, like, if at first the data doesn't produce the results that you want, you massage the data. And then if massaging the data still doesn't produce the results you want, you beat it into submission until it says what you want. So, which is why it's you can get numbers to tell you anything you want. So my point being that make sure you're getting your data from a reputable source. Usually best to get it from 2, 3, 4 different sources. Try to verify it by talking to other experts in the industry. A lot of times it's not hard to find someone on on LinkedIn or through the, trade associations or just other people in the industry. And we're calling the company and asking them how they come to the conclusions of the data, because so much matters as far as what is the population size of where you're taking it from. Where was the data extracted? Was it only in the Northeast? Because if you followed any elections, you can tell, like, there's you try to extract data from different parts of the country and get totally different results. And it's not, none of it is right or wrong, right? It is what it is. And so, I getting back to the point, I think there are a lot of paid services out there. I subscribe to a few. Some are incredibly expensive, so I don't really bother with that. And I find a lot of times I can get what I need through other methods. And another thing too that people I think don't think about is there's a ton of databases out there that are free to the public through the library system, and because there are the data is mandated by law to be available for the public. Well, how does the government a lot of times get that data out there? It's through the public library system. So go and talk to a librarian if you're looking for a certain data and stuff. Another way too is if you're by a local university, or even if you're not, just call up a university and like talk to them, find out the department. Again, if you're focusing on youth or something like that, you can talk to their education department, I don't know, maybe their mental health counseling, whatever it may be. And a lot of times they can share or be more than willing to help you out with getting the data for free, because universities have access to it as well. So so those are just a couple ways to get around the system.
Oh yeah, I love the public library, and and I don't know. I mean, when I was growing up way back when, that was what we had for an option. That was before the information age, but the research librarians are good friends, and that's an excellent use of tax dollars.
Yeah.
But it's almost like now there's a flood of information, and people can have all sorts of data, and they go get them from other sources. So they have it, but they don't know necessarily how reliable each of the sources are. And so how do you help folks navigate some of the better places to look for data, and when they come to you with a bunch, how to interpret it or make sense of it?
Well, I mean, a lot of times for my clients, I end up doing it for them. But the times that someone has come to me, it's depending on that situation, getting down and digging through the data and figuring out what it means, So, and I think sometimes too, some of the data is best left to maybe even experts in that industry. So I might find, again, a trade association or something like that, and ask them to explain to me. I used to work for actually an environmental economics firm before I started my own company. And we were working on a very large project for the entire state of Florida. And universities were some of the best resources I used to call all around the country. And so we were researching crops and how much pricing on crops, chemicals, all this other stuff. So, but some of these universities, especially at the university extension programs, collect the most abstract data, and their department heads are right on the internet. In 2 seconds, you can find it. And there's a lot of times that I would call and talk to professors in the industry and ask them to explain to me. And because we were looking at at one thing, for an example, we're researching the prices of sod. Well, forever, it doesn't sound very interesting, but it was to me, I don't know, maybe because I'm just a nerdy data guy, but the prices on sod were pretty flat for decades. And then all of a sudden 1 year, like 5 years ago, the price of sod like doubled or tripled. And then it went flat again for the next year. Well, when you're an economist and you're trying to make sense of trends and you see things are flat and all of a sudden a huge blip for no apparent reason, I'm on the phone talking to professors and interviewing them and like, what's going on? And basically what they told me is that after decades of the same flat price, the industry like decided, or growers decided like, we deserve more. And they just like, basically like within a year, they just, doubled or tripled the prices to reflect how they should be now. And I was like, all right, well, is this going to happen again in the next year? And his answer was no. That was that was a major adjustment that happened just once. And I know sod and this kind of prices probably don't interest any nonprofit at all. But the point being is that sometimes when you're looking at trends or looking at the data and something doesn't make sense, find out. A lot of times you can find out from the universities, and they can, universities, their professor. I mean, these guys that spend 80 hours a week just researching and writing academic papers on it, and have brilliant minds, can give you a ton of information that any expert working for a nonprofit or something like that might not know. So don't limit your options to just people and the industry on the street.
Do you find, Thomas, that there's a great reluctance on the part of people who come in to see you to actually go out and talk to people? They may rely on internet or some other research. Do you find that there's, when people are trying to put these ideas together, that they're somewhat reluctant to go talk to other people?
Sure. Or don't know what questions to ask. Which is, I guess, another reason that they hire me to do it. But I'll work with clients to develop questions and get an agreed set of questions that we want, because I do a lot of structured interviews where we have a set list of questions, and I will call that industry expert and whoever it may be, and talk to them and ask for 5-10 minutes at a time and just run through specifically what we need. And that way we can when we look at the data and say I interviewed 20 different people and these are the results we're getting, that we know that I asked all the same questions, and that even if the answers aren't consistent, the questions were. So I think so that is a lot of what I do, is and to make sure that I'm getting from my clients the questions answered that are matter to them. And so bring some together. But then for people on their own, I find a lot of, for people I give advice to on the side that are not a client, that there's some reluctance maybe to pick up the phone, or lack of motivation, whatever it may be, or to talk to these people. So it's not for everyone. But cold calling takes some time to get used to.
Well, a lot of people won't cold call, and they don't always know. And I had a consultation with the gentleman that was referred to me today that wanted to do some programs. So some of the questions I was asking, he didn't quite have answers to, and so a lot of times people will probably approach you and they don't necessarily know what questions to ask. And so I think that's a huge advantage to working with you and 50 USA markets, your agency, and with you and your partners to get that information. Because if they're not asking the right questions, they can come away with something that's completely off center. It may be feasible when they're asking the wrong questions, but when they start asking the right questions, their idea may not be feasible.
Right. And certainly it can be the wording and the questions that you ask, and producing the right answer, or skewing because you ask it in a certain way that's going to give you the intended result that you want, you can spend all this time asking all the wrong questions, and it's just it's just all your notes are worth going in the garbage. So yeah, and that's just more about, thinking ahead and being smart and really, taking your time. Don't rush it. There's nothing wrong with taking baby steps. And because once you start taking the baby steps, then that doesn't mean that you have to move incredibly slow. It just means that there's small steps, but they're very structured. You're staying disciplined. You have a strategy, and then you're moving forward. And so yeah, I mean, I think I think a lot of people, just don't take the time or think like through like, what do I really want? And so certainly when you are going to take up someone else's time, in your own time, you really got to be very clear about what you want and what answers, why do you want them?
Yeah, I think that's the value of having a trusted advisor like yourself to kind of sort of get people to step back, take a breath, because uh, social entrepreneurs they're difference makers, and they see a problem, they want to get in there and get at it and do something. And they're excited about a large vision that they have, and they don't always think about that sequencing or who else is doing that, which is
Yeah.
something that we talked about at great length. So when you talk about some of the problems that society has, they're pretty broad based, like homelessness, and so when you got somebody that has a nonprofit out there, how do they go about differentiating themselves by using that research?
Um, well, certainly, again, speaking in very, I guess, vague terms. I mean, because it depends on, again, what data you're getting and what you're using how to use it is you might see a real need for it. People in your community are saying like, you need to start a nonprofit that is going to address this issue. This is a big issue in our community, and I really think it's just a national problem. Well, then you go and you do the data and you find nationwide, and because you're wanting to start a nonprofit, we're going to be national. We have this huge idea. You're creating this grand strategy. You're doing all this research. You're researching all your competitors and in Oregon to Maine and wherever else. But then you go and you really look at the data and you talk to people, and maybe it's not that much of an issue nationwide, but it's an issue to certain segments of or certain areas of the country. Or maybe it's just something that's very unique to your community in itself. And that's why I say there's nothing wrong with starting with baby steps, and maybe maybe there's nothing wrong with starting just targeting your community, your school, your neighborhood, whatever it may be. Start there. Get some systems down, get some processes down. There's going to be a lot of learning, and then slowly, then you're going to learn. You're going to build some systems. You're going to see what works and what doesn't work, and be able to go and move on from there. And when you start smaller, a lot of times you don't need as much funding, and so it's a lot easier to get the funding that you need to get up and going. But then also, when you're going to look for those bigger investors, let's say, that the donors, you're going to have already a proven track record and references, and you're going to have this is what we've done, this will, and so I think it again, it depends on what you want to do, but it's just can be a smarter way to move, and there's nothing wrong with starting small. I don't think anyone gets into the nonprofit industry to make millions anyway. So you're not in it for the money. I know you wanted to get into it to be in it, create some type of positive impact on on the nation, the world, but just get up and get moving. There's nothing wrong with that. And maybe it's a year down the road, maybe it's 5 years down the road. You never know how fast you're going to grow. But just starting and get moving. I mean, that's, you look at companies like Uber or, smaller, mom and pop stores, like even I hate to use, but like Walmart, and they just started, and Walmart had its own location. It was pretty, it wasn't very big for many, many years. And then finally they hit that point and like, now we can, now we're ready to expand. There's nothing wrong with
Step process where you build on these successes, and by building step by step and having small successes and creating that track record, and that's a cumulative impact. And
that.
so you become known for successfully building the sequence. We did have a comment in on question 3, how does your nonprofit differentiate itself?
Mm-hmm.
Nobel City Chamber of Commerce, they said we hashtag think novel, and we hashtag take risk. So this Chamber of Commerce, and they've got links up here. So I'm going to have a look at that at some point
Okay.
and see what it is that they do. So, but that's what they do. They think novel, and so they probably have a process for that. And when you're working with somebody that's not sure how to differentiate themselves, how do you guide them through that process?
Um, well, I think if they're not sure how to differentiate themselves, it depends on a few things. First one being is like, well, again, back to what are your competitors doing, right? And let's brainstorm some different ways of doing things, and maybe let's take that and talk to other people in the industry, some of these different ideas, and like, hey, what do you think about what if we did things this way? What if we targeted this segment that way? That seems to be a real underserved area. Why is no one targeting that area? And you might find there's a real good reason that no one's targeting it again. So you don't want to differentiate yourself that way. So it's a lot of back and forth. And I think sometimes too, well, not I think, I know. Is like a mentor of mine once told me many years ago that, follow your heart, you'll never go wrong. And I think that a lot of people that are in the nonprofit industry get into it because they're driven by their heart. So I think that a lot of times, your heart will tell you how you really feel. You want to differentiate yourself too, because you're unique. And maybe it's best not to always just talk to other people and see how other people are saying you need to differentiate yourself this way, but sometimes you really know deep down, so it just depends on the situation, but those are a couple ways.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we brought up the question of how competitors are getting funded. So, as an example, when you were looking at starting yours, how were your competitors getting funded, and what were some of the steps you took to find out how your competitors were getting funded?
Well, I did, I found that some of the companies that I was competitors with are small person shops like myself. Some people actually now a company that I have a strategic partnership with, and we're working on a big deal together right now. They do things very low efficient. They have offices all around the world, but they just keep 1 or 2 people in each country, and everyone pretty much works remotely from home. But they have also people that if they're working on a project and they have someone in their office in Shanghai, that while they're sleeping, the person in Shanghai can go ahead and take over. So I just learned a bit more about how they work and how they're more efficient, just by talking to them, and then eventually getting we jived quite well, so we ended up going into business together. But as far as choose your partners, but I also just research people online and just try to find out, call them, ask some questions, maybe pretend to be a potential client, or just talk to them, who I am and what I'm looking at doing. And some of these guys have they do some of what I do, but then they have their main focus, their job of their company, and then some of the. So I see a lot in my area, which is a lot of the research. Again, when I got started, I was mainly focused on international. It's just smaller, very like low cost operations. That's also how I want to build my company even more when I begin to bring people on. I have a lot of connections. I used to live in New York and again Colorado. And then I've been partnering with people in Chicago too. So that's how I knew I wanted to do it. But again, I'm on the business end, not the nonprofit end. As far as how my company is structured, so you just find other organizations that are similar to yours and start asking them questions. Pick up the phone, call them, email them, see if you can set up a time. And then even calling some of these again nonprofit associations and talk to them like, what's the best way I can get started? And one thing that I remember actually from when I lived in Colorado is there was the YNP, the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network, and if you're below like 35, or you think it's 35 and below or 40 and below, they have events every month, I think, and go to those events. Go where people like you are, or people that you want to emulate, where they're going, and it's a great way to talk to them. And you can find people that are going to give you just amazing and valuable advice. You're going to find out how they build their businesses. Get their card, see if you can set up a time to meet with them for coffee or whatever, and find out what did they do, and you're going to find out ways that work for you. I just knew that I didn't want to go and start renting office space and raising capital. That's just not my style. For some people it is. So, but from seeing how other people operate in different business models or nonprofit models, that's how you kind of learn how you want to run. So just talk to people in the industry.
Well, that's pretty important. And, that's that first step to building a high-performance nonprofit is to build that solid foundation. And all of the things that we talked about go into building that foundation, because it's being sure what it is you want to do, who you're trying to help, and what that looks like, and what you have on hand and what you don't have. And then moving forward and finding out who's in your space. Because a lot of the research, market research, doesn't really just go into competitors. We're trying to find board members or servant leaders, volunteers, as well as donors. And so your message has to resonate with all of the people who are potentially impacted and the people who will be using the services. It's amazing to me how many times or how little time some folks spend talking to people that'll actually use the service. Because, they build it. Well, this is notoriously true for the government. They build it and they can't figure out why no one shows up.
Right. Yeah, and I think, and it actually rings a bell because it brings me back to one of the very first nonprofits I was involved with. And we created, it was a nonprofit arts community, and it was called Art House. And I'm originally from Cleveland, and it was very it was over by the Cleveland Zoo off of Fulton Avenue, actually. So it was very like working class to some, borderline or even below poverty people. Not the best schools in that area. And we got funding actually from one of the councilwomen. And her ward, each ward got a certain amount of funding to do in the community what they wanted to do. And the director of the arts nonprofit, convinced her that like this is going to be great for the community. And they took that money and they bought a foreclosed house. It's like an old, like 3-story foreclosed house. And then you're like, all right, well, how are you going to renovate it? Well, they just got together people in the community and talked to all their friends and got volunteers over. And we were over on like Saturdays, spending time, ripping up floors, ripping out walls, and everyone put their time in, and that was a great, efficient way to do things, to save on a lot of money. And then they renovated it, and then started. One of the ways is they brought local artists there to teach classes. So they made I think a bit of a cut on whatever the teachers charged to help the nonprofit run. They gave them the space as well, but also they developed a relationship with a local school where they would go and to the students, and I think they offered like I don't know if they didn't have like an art studio there, or they did. There was an after-school program. I forget, this is a long time ago, but they would bring the students over from the school to the arts community, which is just a block or two away, and the students there could do, they had sculpting and like bronzing and painting and jewelry making, and then they had like an art show every few months where local artists could come and like sell their art stuff. So that was another way for them to like raise money, get the community involved, and target several different segments at once, basically for just the startup money for buying a foreclosed house, which in Cleveland that's not a whole lot of money. So.
Well, I grew up there too, as they used to call it the best location in the nation. So
yeah,
we're hometown boys. Yeah,
wow.
that's pretty important. So but with that group, they brought a lot of people together, and I've seen some nonprofit leaders that don't necessarily have a lot of money, but they're great at mobilizing people,
Yeah.
and some have started to raise money over time because they're great. And they do things with all volunteer staff. They don't take a check out of it, but they're not pulling money out of their own pockets to make it run. They've actually got some powerful and sustainable stuff going. And that's because they knew how to talk to different people. They talked to everybody around what they were trying to do. Travis Smith, who runs Impact here in Denver, Colorado, is one that comes to mind. It's just remarkable, we're coming to the top of the hour, and it just every week is like this. We could go on for hours, and I would be fascinated and love to learn more, but we have a limited time for our audience. So, what are some closing thoughts that you want to leave people with, and tell us how this can get in contact with you and work with you and
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah. I guess a few parting thoughts is certainly it depends where you are in your development of your organization. If you're, again, I hate to kick a dead horse, but if you're in the beginning stages, you've got an idea, or you have an idea, you've already done your 501c3, you haven't done research on your competition, what's going on yet, you're having a hard time finding funding, do that market research, go out and talk to people, talk to all your local places, state agencies, talk to the national trade associations, go to the local nonprofit networking events, find people that you want to emulate. Don't be afraid to ask people for some of their time, and be very prepared on what questions and what you want to get out of them, of a meeting. But more often than not, I find people are more than happy to talk about themselves and their successes, and help you out, and at the same time. And if you haven't done the secondary data, start looking for it. If you can't find it, then again, these people you're making connections with, find out where they're getting their data. What are some of the trends? Don't be afraid to call up, some of the donors and find out what do they see the trends are. Would they ever fund this type of project, or who would fund that type of project? Because a lot of times, a donor organization is going to know other donor organizations. So, and you might find that it's a small world after all. And I think, again, if you're just starting in, your idea, really try to think start small. Don't be afraid to start small, and talk to people that are doing similar work to what you're doing. That's probably what I could say. Without going on for too long, I think also that, yeah, you can reach me. You can go to my website, which is 50usamarkets.com. You can also email me at T and then my last name, which is Moviel at 50usamarkets.com. Or pick up the phone and just give me a call. I still have a Colorado number, actually, so from a long time ago. So you can always just call me at 303-819-9847. And I'll be more than happy to talk to you, listen to your idea, learn more about what you have going on, maybe what some of your challenges are. If I cannot help you out, I very well may know someone that can. So don't be afraid to reach out. And so there's a lot of exciting ideas, a lot of exciting projects out there. I think it just you got to be relentless and just be unwilling to compromise. If there's something that you want, go get it. And it just takes a lot of time and effort and some good rational thinking. So.
Oh, very good. Very sage advice. That's wonderful. I mean, we got all kind of connections, Colorado and Cleveland. And
I know, it's crazy.
it's just crazy. Wonderful work you're doing out there, and the stuff you're doing is very useful. My best friend's dad was an agricultural economist. He taught at Oklahoma State, Clement Ward, and he retired about 5 years ago. So, so the way that an economist approaches things is really different, but it's thorough. Thomas, thank you very, very much for your heart and your work and all of the great things you're doing out there. Thank you, everyone that tuned in to be with us here on the Nonprofit Chat. So we'll be getting this interview up again. I look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Likewise.
Tommy. And we will have this available later in the week also on the Nonprofit Exchange, our sister podcast site. So you can download these programs and listen to them in your car or while you're jogging. And so we like to pass this information on. Again, thanks to you, Thomas. I look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you to all who've joined us. And we will see you here next week on the Nonprofit Chat. Until then, this is Russ Dennis signing off. Good night, Thomas.
Good night. Thanks again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.